Sarah never thought twice about giving up her seat on the bus. It was a small act of kindness, something she had done 100 times before. But when the man she helped showed up at her workplace the next day, dressed in a tailored suit, looking nothing like the exhausted stranger from before, she realized she had stepped into something much bigger than she ever could have imagined. Sarah Watson barely managed to squeeze into the packed bus, balancing a cup of cheap coffee in one hand and her worn-out backpack in the other. The morning rush hour was always the same, exhausting, frustrating, and unavoidable. She had woken up late again, sprinted to the bus stop, and now stood wedged between a businessman glued to his phone and a teenager with headphones blasting music loud enough for the entire bus to hear. She exhaled, trying not to spill her coffee as the driver took a sharp turn. When a seat opened up near the window, she wasted no time claiming it. It wasn't much, but at least she could rest for a few minutes before heading into another long, draining day at work. She stared out the window, watching the city rush past, her mind already running through the things she needed to do, emails to send, bills to pay, the never-ending cycle of responsibilities that never seemed to slow down. The bus stopped again, and a new wave of passengers pushed their way inside. That was when she noticed him. A young man stepped in, well-dressed but looking unsteady, like he wasn't entirely present. His face was pale, almost too pale, and his grip on the overhead bar was weak. Something about the way he swayed made Sarah sit up straighter. At first, she thought he had simply lost his balance, but then his fingers trembled against the metal pole, his knuckles turning white as if he was using every ounce of strength to stay upright. His eyes fluttered shut for half a second before he forced them open again. Sarah hesitated only a moment before getting to her feet. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, stepping closer. The man's gaze flickered toward her, unfocused, as if he was trying to place her voice. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but before he could say a word, his knees buckled. Sarah moved quickly, grabbing his arm before he could collapse completely. "Sit down," she urged, guiding him toward her seat. "Here, take this." The man didn't argue. He lowered himself onto the seat, exhaling sharply, his hands gripping his lap as if trying to ground himself. His breathing was shallow, uneven, and Sarah felt a twist of concern tighten in her chest. For a few moments, he stayed silent, his head tilted slightly forward as if he was still fighting off whatever was making him weak. Slowly, he blinked up at her, his gray eyes meeting hers with something that looked like gratitude. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Sarah gave him a small nod. "You sure you're all right?" He nodded slightly but didn't look convinced himself. The bus jolted forward again, and Sarah braced herself against the sudden movement. She stayed standing next to him, watching carefully. The man took slow, measured breaths, his shoulders tense. After another few stops, he finally seemed to regain some color in his face. She waited, half expecting him to say something else, but he didn't. When her stop came up, she hesitated for just a moment before stepping toward the door. "Take care," she said over her shoulder, not really expecting a response. He didn't say anything, but as she stepped off the bus, she had the strangest feeling that she had just walked away from something important. At the time, she had no idea how right she was. Sarah spent the rest of the day trying to shake the strange feeling that lingered after her encounter on the bus. It wasn't like she hadn't helped strangers before. Living in the city, she had seen her fair share of people in distress, commuters fainting from exhaustion, street performers pushing past their limits, overworked professionals collapsing under the weight of stress. But there was something different about him. Something about the way he had looked at her, like he wasn't used to anyone offering kindness without expecting something in return. By the time she made it to her office, the morning rush had already drained most of her energy. The call center where she worked was as chaotic as ever, ringing phones, frustrated customers, and the distant hum of co-workers who had long since given up pretending they enjoyed their jobs. She barely had time to drop her bag at her desk before her headset beeped with an incoming call. "Thank you for calling Green Tech Solutions. This is Sarah speaking. How can I assist you today?" The voice on the other end immediately launched into a complaint about a missed shipment, and just like that, she was back in her usual routine. The day passed in a blur of apologies, troubleshooting, and mentally calculating how much money she had left in her bank account after rent and bills. But every so often, between calls, her mind drifted back to him. Who was he? Why had he looked so unsteady? Had he made it home safely? By the time her shift ended, she had almost convinced herself to forget about it. Until the next morning, when everything changed. Sarah arrived at work as usual, balancing a coffee in one hand and pushing through the glass doors of the office building. She barely had time to settle into her chair when her coworker Kim leaned over her cubicle, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You have a visitor," Kim said, her voice low and conspiratorial. Sarah frowned, setting down her coffee. "A visitor? Who?" Kim shrugged. "No idea, but he looks important." "Like, way too rich to be here, important." Sarah blinked. That didn't make sense. No one ever visited her at work, and certainly no one who looked important. Curiosity getting the best of her, she stood and made her way toward the front lobby. The moment she stepped out of the main office, she saw him. The man from the bus. But he looked completely different. Gone was the pale, unsteady figure struggling to stand. Now, he stood tall, confident, dressed in an expensive tailored suit that fit him perfectly. His dark hair, which had been slightly disheveled the day before, was now neatly styled, and the exhaustion she had seen in his eyes was replaced by something sharper, more focused. He turned when he saw her, and for a brief moment, a flicker of something familiar crossed his face. Recognition. Maybe even gratitude. Sarah, on the other hand, was frozen in place. He took a step forward, offering a small but genuine smile. "Sarah Watson?" She nodded slowly, her mind still struggling to process what was happening. "My name is Leo Harrison," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a sleek business card. "I believe I owe you a proper thank you." Sarah hesitated before taking the card, her eyes scanning the embossed lettering. Leo Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises. Her stomach dropped. She had just given up her seat on a crowded bus to a millionaire. And now he was standing in front of her. She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I don't understand." Leo chuckled softly. "I imagine you wouldn't. But I'd like to change that. If you have a moment, I'd love to talk." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what was happening, but something told her that whatever this was, her life was about to change forever. Sarah followed Leo out of the office lobby, still trying to wrap her mind around what was happening. The man she had helped on the bus, the same man who had nearly collapsed in front of her, was now standing in front of a sleek black luxury car parked just outside the building. Everything about him seemed different. His suit was crisp, his posture perfectly composed, and there was no sign of weakness in his expression. It was almost as if the man from the bus had been a completely different person. He gestured toward the car. "Do you have time for a coffee? I promise it won't take long." Sarah hesitated. She had never been the type to jump into cars with strangers, let alone ones who showed up unannounced at her workplace. But something about Leo didn't feel dangerous. If anything, he seemed intrigued by her. And, if she was honest, she was just as curious about him. After a beat, she nodded. "All right. But just coffee." A driver opened the car door for her, and Sarah slid inside. The interior smelled of leather and something faintly expensive. Leo took the seat beside her, and within moments, the car pulled smoothly away from the curb. They rode in silence for the first few minutes. Sarah could feel him watching her, but she kept her gaze fixed on the city streets outside, still unsure of what to say. Finally, she turned to him. "So, are you going to tell me why you're here? Or do rich guys always track down people who give up their seats on the bus?" Leo let out a quiet laugh. "I don't usually make a habit of it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Good to know." His smile faded slightly, and he leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. The truth is, yesterday was the first time in a long time that a stranger helped me without expecting anything in return. People recognize me. They know my name, my company, my wealth. And most of the time, they treat me accordingly. Sarah frowned, tilting her head. Accordingly? Leo's gaze flickered toward her. Let's just say I'm used to people being nice to me when they want something. Sarah considered that. She had never thought about what it would be like to live in his world, where every interaction came with an expectation, a hidden agenda. It must have been exhausting. She shrugged. Well, I didn't know who you were. I just saw someone who needed help. Leo studied her for a moment before nodding. And that's exactly why I'm here. The car slowed to a stop in front of an upscale cafe with large glass windows and a minimalist design. A hostess immediately stepped forward as they entered, leading them to a quiet corner table. As soon as they sat down, a waiter approached. Leo ordered without looking at the menu, black coffee, no sugar. Sarah, still feeling out of place, hesitated before ordering the same. When they were alone again, she folded her hands on the table. So, what exactly do you want from me? Leo exhaled, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of the table. I want to offer you a job. Sarah blinked. A job? Yes. He leaned forward slightly. I run one of the largest investment firms in the city. I have an entire team of professionals with degrees from the best schools. But I don't have many people around me that I actually trust. Sarah frowned, still not understanding. And you think you can trust me? You don't even know me. Leo gave her a knowing look. I know enough. I know that when you saw someone struggling, you didn't hesitate to help. I know you weren't interested in who I was or what I could do for you. That's rare. Sarah let out a breath. And what exactly would this job be? Leo smiled. I want you to work directly with me. A personal assistant, if you want to call it that. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me the truth. Sarah laughed, shaking her head. You want to hire me just because I was nice to you on a bus? Leo tilted his head. I want to hire you because I need someone who sees people for who they really are, not just what they have. I have a feeling you're one of those people. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process his words. The idea was ridiculous. She had no experience working for someone like him, no background in finance, no connections in the corporate world. But there was something in the way he looked at her, as if he had already made up his mind. She took a deep breath. And if I say no? Leo didn't flinch. Then you say no. I won't pressure you. Sarah studied him. There was no arrogance in his tone, no entitlement. Just an offer. A strange, unexpected, life-changing offer. She exhaled. I need to think about it. Leo nodded, as if he had expected that. Take your time. The waiter returned with their coffees, placing the cups on the table. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, staring down at the dark liquid as if it held the answers she needed. A few hours ago, she had been just another exhausted worker in a crowded city, trying to make it through another day. Now, she was sitting across from a millionaire who wanted to change her life. And the craziest part was that she had no idea what to do about it. Sarah spent the rest of the day in a daze, replaying every moment of her conversation with Leo. She kept expecting to wake up and realize it had been some strange, stress-induced daydream, but the business card sitting on her nightstand told her otherwise. Leo Harrison, CEO of Harrison Enterprises. The offer sat in the back of her mind, impossible to ignore. It didn't make any sense. She was just a customer service rep in a job she barely tolerated. She had no experience in high-stakes business, no reason to be in the orbit of someone like him. Yet, for some reason, he had sought her out, convinced that she was someone he could trust. By the time morning came, Sarah still didn't have an answer. She walked into work the next day feeling more restless than usual. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the phones rang in a never-ending loop, and the voices of her co-workers blended into a low hum of background noise. She went through the motions, answering calls, filing reports, and reminding herself that this was normal. This was predictable. But predictability had never felt so suffocating. During her lunch break, she pulled out her phone, her fingers hovering over the number on Leo's business card. She had told him she needed time to think, but the truth was, she had been thinking about nothing else. She took a deep breath and finally dialed. The call barely rang twice before he picked up. Sarah, Leo's voice came through, smooth and composed, as if he had been expecting her. She hesitated. I've been thinking about your offer. Leo was silent for a moment, then, and? Sarah exhaled slowly. I'll do it. There was no surprise in his tone, only certainty. Good. I'll have someone send the details to your email. We'll get everything set up by Monday. Sarah blinked. Wait, that fast? Leo chuckled. You'll get used to that. The call ended soon after, and Sarah stared at her screen, her heart pounding. She had just quit her job. She had just agreed to work for a man she had met on a bus. There was no turning back now. Monday arrived faster than she expected. When she stepped out of the cab in front of Harrison Enterprises, the sheer size of the building nearly overwhelmed her. The sleek glass exterior towered above the city, its reflective surface catching the morning light. People in sharp suits and polished shoes moved in and out of the lobby with purpose, their conversations brisk, their expressions unreadable. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped inside. The receptionist greeted her immediately, already expecting her. Within minutes, she was led through a set of private elevators, ascending to the top floor where Leo's office was located. When the doors opened, she found herself standing in a vast, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The office was modern, yet inviting, dark wood furniture, minimalist design, and an air of quiet authority. Leo was already there, standing near the window, his hands in his pockets. He turned as she entered, offering a slight smile. Welcome, he said. I hope you're ready for a challenge. Sarah let out a nervous laugh. I don't even know what I'm doing yet. Leo gestured for her to sit. You'll learn. Over the next few hours, Sarah was introduced to the details of her new role. She wasn't just a personal assistant, she was meant to be his direct point of contact, someone who could filter through the noise of his busy world. It was a whirlwind of information, schedules, and unfamiliar terminology. But despite the overwhelming nature of it all, she found herself strangely exhilarated. Leo worked with an effortless kind of confidence, making split-second decisions that affected millions of dollars. He barely glanced at the financial reports his team sent over, as if his instincts were sharper than any data sheet. But beneath his composed exterior, Sarah noticed something else, something that reminded her of the man she had met on the bus. There were moments when he rubbed his temple, subtle signs of exhaustion creeping in. He wasn't invincible, no matter how much he tried to appear that way. At the end of the day, as Sarah gathered her things, Leo spoke again. You did well today, he said, watching her. Sarah raised an eyebrow. All I did was listen and try not to get lost. Leo smirked. That's more than most people do on their first day. Sarah hesitated. Can I ask you something? Leo nodded. That day on the bus, what was wrong? His expression didn't change, but there was a brief flicker of something in his eyes. He exhaled, leaning against his desk. I hadn't slept in 3 days. A deal I had been working on for months was falling apart, and no matter what I did, nothing seemed to fix it. Sarah frowned. So you just kept going until your body gave out? Leo shrugged. I didn't think I had a choice. Sarah studied him. And now? He held her gaze. Now I have someone who will remind me when to stop. Sarah wasn't sure what to say to that. But as she left the office that evening, stepping back into the bustling city, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just walked into something bigger than she had ever imagined. Sarah quickly learned that working for Leo Harrison was nothing like she had expected. There was no slow adjustment period, no time to ease into her role. From the moment she walked into the office each morning, she was thrown into a world that moved faster than anything she had ever experienced. Meetings were scheduled and rescheduled within seconds. Phone calls came in at all hours, demanding immediate responses. Decisions that affected millions of dollars were made over a single cup of coffee. She was given access to Leo's entire schedule, every email, every call, every message that came through his office. It was overwhelming at first, but she adapted quickly, relying on instincts she hadn't even known she had. She learned to anticipate what Leo needed before he had to ask. She filtered through the flood of information that came his way, making sure only the most important details reached him. Despite the chaos, she found herself fascinated by the way he worked. Leo had an effortless confidence, the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter when he entered a room. But he wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist. He could see problems before they happened, anticipate market shifts before anyone else. He never raised his voice, never lost control. Even when negotiations turned tense, he remained calm, unshakable. But there was another side to him, one that few people saw. Late at night, after the rest of the office had emptied, Sarah sometimes caught glimpses of exhaustion in his eyes. He rubbed his temples when he thought no one was looking. He checked his watch constantly, as if time was something he could never quite hold on to. One evening, as Sarah was organizing files in his office, she finally decided to ask. "You never stop, do you?" she said, glancing up from her laptop. Leo looked up from the contract he had been reviewing. "Excuse me? You work all day, and then you keep working when everyone else goes home," she said. "When do you ever take a break?" Leo smirked, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Breaks are a luxury I can't afford." Sarah frowned. "That's ridiculous. Even CEOs need to sleep." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And what would you suggest?" She crossed her arms. "A full night's sleep for starters. And maybe eating something that isn't just coffee." Leo chuckled. "You're the first person who's ever lectured me about my habits." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Somehow, that doesn't surprise me." Leo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "The truth is, I've been running on adrenaline for years. There's always something that needs to be done, another deal, another decision. Stopping feels impossible." Sarah watched him for a moment. "And yet, you nearly passed out on a bus." His smirk faded. He didn't answer right away. She softened her tone. "Look, I get it. You have a lot on your plate. But you're not doing yourself any favors by burning out. No one can function at that speed forever." Leo was silent for a moment before finally nodding. "Maybe you're right." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Did the great Leo Harrison just admit I'm right?" Leo shook his head, amused. "Don't let it go to your head." Sarah smiled, but as she watched him return to his paperwork, she couldn't shake the feeling that beneath all the power and control, there was something else. A man who had been running for so long, he didn't know how to stop. She just wasn't sure if he ever would. Sarah's days blurred into a steady rhythm of early mornings, late nights, and an ever-growing list of responsibilities. Working for Leo was nothing like her old job. Every decision mattered, every second was accounted for, and every move he made had the potential to shift an entire industry. It was exhausting, but strangely exhilarating. She found herself adjusting faster than she expected. She learned how to navigate high-stakes meetings, how to keep track of the endless negotiations and deadlines that filled Leo's schedule. She memorized his habits, the way he preferred his coffee black, the way he always scanned a room before speaking, the way his jaw tensed slightly when something wasn't going his way. But the more time she spent around him, the more she realized that, for all his power and success, Leo Harrison was a man who carried more weight than he let on. One night, long after the office had emptied, Sarah was still at her desk, going through a stack of emails that had piled up throughout the day. Leo was across the room, his tie loosened, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. He was staring at the massive screen in front of him, deep in thought. Sarah glanced at the time. It was almost midnight. She let out a sigh. "Do you ever actually go home?" Leo smirked but didn't look away from the screen. "And miss all the fun?" Sarah shook her head. "I don't think working yourself into the ground qualifies as fun." Leo finally turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "What would you rather I do? Take a vacation? Sit on a beach somewhere and pretend the world doesn't keep moving?" Sarah leaned back in her chair. "I don't know, maybe just slow down for 5 minutes? I've been working with you for weeks, and I don't think I've seen you take a single real break." Leo exhaled, rubbing his temples. "That's because there's always something that needs to be done. If I stop, things fall apart." Sarah studied him. "Do they? Or do you just think they will?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pushed away from his desk and walked toward the window, looking out over the city. The lights stretched for miles, a sea of movement that never seemed to stop. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "I built this company from nothing," he said quietly. "Every decision I've ever made has been about making sure it doesn't collapse. You don't get to the top by being careless." Sarah watched him carefully. "And you think taking care of yourself is careless?" His jaw tightened slightly. "I think it's a risk." Sarah let his words settle in the air between them. She could see it now, the pressure he carried, the way he had convinced himself that the only way to survive was to keep moving, to never let his guard down. She stood up, walking over to stand beside him. "You don't have to do this alone, you know." Leo turned his head, his gray eyes meeting hers. "And who else is going to do it?" Sarah held his gaze. "The people you trust. If you actually let them help." Leo studied her for a long moment. For the first time since she had met him, she saw something shift in his expression, something almost vulnerable. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. He smirked, shaking his head. "You're really not afraid to tell me what I don't want to hear, are you?" Sarah smiled. "Nope. That's why you hired me, remember?" Leo chuckled, but there was something softer in his eyes now, something less guarded. For the first time, Sarah wondered if she had just cracked through the walls he had spent years building. And if she had, she wasn't sure what that meant. The weeks passed, and Sarah's role in Leo's life became more than just managing his schedule and keeping his meetings in order. She wasn't just his assistant anymore. She had become someone he relied on, someone who saw beyond the perfect image he projected to the world. She noticed the things others missed, the tension in his shoulders when a deal didn't go as planned, the way he rubbed his temples when exhaustion crept in, the rare moments when he let his guard down just enough for her to catch a glimpse of something real. One evening, after another long day, Sarah was finishing up some last-minute reports when she noticed Leo still at his desk, his laptop open, but his focus elsewhere. The skyline outside his window was dark except for the glow of the city lights, stretching endlessly into the night. She hesitated before speaking. "You should go home." Leo glanced at her, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "So should you." Sarah crossed her arms. "I don't have an empire to run." "You do." Leo leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "That's exactly why I can't just leave things unfinished." Sarah studied him. He looked tired. Not just physically, but in a way that ran deeper, as if the weight of everything he had built was pressing down on him harder than usual. She walked over to his desk, resting her hands on the edge. "You once told me that if you stopped moving, things would fall apart. Do you still believe that?" Leo didn't answer immediately. He turned his gaze toward the window, watching the city below. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "I don't know how to slow down. Every time I try, I feel like I'm wasting time. Like I should be doing something." Sarah let his words sink in before replying. "Maybe it's not about stopping. Maybe it's about trusting that things won't collapse just because you take a breath. Leo met her eyes, and for a long moment, they just looked at each other. There was something different in his expression, something unspoken but undeniably there. After a pause, he let out a slow breath and closed his laptop. All right. Let's get out of here. Sarah blinked. What? Leo stood, grabbing his jacket. You're right. I need a break. And so do you. Sarah hesitated, caught off guard. Where are we going? Leo smirked. Anywhere but here. Before she could argue, he was already heading toward the elevator. Against her better judgment, she followed. The city air was crisp when they stepped outside. The usual chaos of the streets had quieted slightly, the late hour bringing a different kind of energy. Leo didn't say where they were going, and Sarah didn't ask. They just walked, side by side, neither of them rushing for once. After a few blocks, they ended up at a small cafe tucked away from the main streets. It wasn't one of the high-end places Leo usually frequented. It was simple, quiet, the kind of place Sarah might have gone to on her own. Leo held the door open for her, and they found a table near the window. The waitress took their orders, just coffee, nothing extravagant. As they sat there, something shifted between them. There were no contracts to sign, no deadlines looming over them. Just two people, talking like old friends. Leo leaned back in his chair, watching her. You know, when I first offered you this job, I didn't expect you to challenge me as much as you do. Sarah smirked. And yet, here we are. Leo chuckled. Here we are. For a while, they just talked. About things that had nothing to do with business, nothing to do with work. It was the first time Sarah had seen him truly relax, the first time he wasn't carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. As the night stretched on, she realized something. Maybe Leo Harrison wasn't just learning how to slow down. Maybe, without realizing it, he was learning how to let someone in. And maybe, just maybe, so was she.